Hello everyone, thanks to the power of the internet. I gotta talk with you all, and it's almost the new year, and hence there's a new meta going around, and I thought I would give you a guide, and because I'm wearing the Stokea shirt, I think it's very obvious who this is. Also, just the way this is set up, there's no going to be more of my face, so many of you can now applaud as I change the scene. We're doing a guide to Levidras Empireo because he's just too good to ignore. So, quick overview. This is the king meta, and Levidras Empireo is the best deck in format. Very, very easy to just slide in and just play the best deck in format. So, let's just go over the list of support, because there's a handful of support, some good, some bad. So let's go over the ride line. There's Snag Nipper Dragon. It's every single grade 0 and D. If you go second, draw a card. You need this one specifically because Score Piercer Dragon needs it in Soul, because when you would ride into your grade 2, you don't have to discard. This seems like just an okay cost, but if you consider what is actually happening for Stokea's ride line, this isn't so bad, considering you only really have Rancor to draw you 2, then discard an Order, or Rowas to get like 2 plant tokens when you go grade 3. Well, grade 2. And this also helps just keep hand consistency, so you're only really getting rid of 2 cards, which saves deck in the long game because you don't have to run any cycler. This grade 2 is actually incredibly powerful because you can just pretty much ignore the 3 energy you would get for turn and then look at the top 5 for any grade 3 or less card. This can be a Blitz Order, this can be a Regalia piece, this can be a grade 3 Levy Address, this can be literally anything you need, which really helps your deck consistency. And what, you get rid of 3 energy that you get 3 of every turn. So even if you're going first, you're going to be left with 3 energy, but that's okay because there's only one other card that you should be running that uses energy. So the consistency is well worth it in this. Now, originally the ride line ended with Destined One of Infinity Levy Address. You could CB1, choose one of your own and your opponent's rearguard to get an Infinity Eyes marker. What does an Infinity Eyes marker do? Well, the marker doesn't have any effect, but Levy Address gives it one. When any player's unit on an Infinity Eyes marker attacks or boost, you can choose it to get plus 10k or minus 10k until end of that battle. If your opponent got 10k, you can remove a marker from that rearguard to draw a card, which helps a really good draw engine, which is why you don't need to run draw triggers in this deck. It's really good. If you also wanted to BM your opponent, you can minus 10k your own unit. But what really helps in this is you can choose any rearguard and just place another marker on it. So you may have that unit get plus 10 because it's not an act. This is just something that happens. You get it, but you're only allowed to ever minus 10k and remove 1. It specifies exactly 1 marker. So even if you have 5 on 1 on a single rearguard, you can only ever remove 1 to draw 1. But you can subtract 50k from that rearguard. Now, Divine. I've spoken about this in a few of my videos, but this being grade 3 or greater locked, I wasn't a big fan of. Now that Empireo is now a thing, I am so glad it is. Things would have been incredibly busted. It's just a Soul Blast cost. Once again, you accelerate tokens by choosing, once again, your own rearguard and your opponent's. Put a marker on them, 10k and a crit. Not too bad, honestly. Pretty simple. It's now incredibly fodder for... Oh, yeah, I forgot this one was here. What is an Infinity Eyes? Well, it's basically a Force marker, and 2 Dragon Tree markers combined. It's just pretty cool, but you can see that the Dragon Tree marker itself has an effect, Infinity Eyes don't, so you can't abuse it. But here is King. Oh dear God. It has the continuous effect for 5k for every base, hard base name of Destined 1 of Infinity Levidras in your soul, and you get all of their divine skills. Neat. Cool. So going back, you would get the... Going back. Yeah, you get that divine skill, so if your opponent's grade 3 or greater, you can Soul Blast, choose to. Now, which means you also have its first effect, but it's been upgraded. You can put a card from hand into Soul instead of playing a CB cost, which saves you a lot of versatility late game and the deck space by not playing some of its support. But also, if you just throw a Levidras, meaning you can throw Empireo or a base version, and you get to place 3 markers literally anywhere. If you wanted to put 3 markers on your own rear guards, go for it. Then you can divine, which is the only restriction. One has to be on your side, the other has to be on your opponent's. And then, of course, because the markers do not have an effect, Empireo has to give it to them. So if you have to fight against a Blagmire and you don't Persona Ride, your markers do lose their effect. They're still there, you just can't do anything with them. But this is the immediate thing that replaced it, because if you're going first, well, if you see base, Levidras, you're still getting 1 more marker than you would have going base. You would have gotten 5k for that because of its continuous, and you still just get the normal marker effect. So there's literally no reason, because even if you do not put, a Persona Ride or a Levidras in, you can still just pay the base cost of Counterblast 1, put 2 markers, except this time you can choose any 2. So before, when you had to choose yourself and your opponents, now you can just put 2 on your own field and just continue your plays as normal. Because I'm bad at PowerPoint, I showed you this one a little bit ahead of time, but this is the set 1 support that it got. You got this order. You don't want to play this order because it hinders your own deck with that Energy Blast 2 cost. So you're always going to have an odd amount of energy, and it's just not worth it because it's just a revive that gets 5k for each Infinity Eyes in the same column you call it to. So if you continuously stacked your opponents and not minus 10k and getting your draws, it's only really getting plus 10k for just the 2 you have in your own rear. Maybe 15k if you were being generous. So not worth it considering the things you can actually use in this deck. But to pay for the continuous countercharger, we got this guy. As long as he attacked or boost, if you got an Infinity Eyes in the same column. If you didn't countercharge, throw him into Soul, which is really helpful because you don't have a lot of Soul Gen in this deck. Before King, you could just countercharge 1 to make more tokens, or pay for a revive. Speaking of, we have Huli. When placed on rear, if you have an Infinity Eyes in the same column, Counterblast 1, revive a grade 3 or less from drop, call it a rear. If there are 3 or more of your Infinity Eyes markers, it gets 10k. So it's always basically reviving something, giving itself plus 10k. Also note, unlike most of Stokeia, Levidras' stuff is going to say if you have an Infinity Eyes marker in the same column. This means even if your opponent has one in the column you call it to, the effect's going to activate. Which is really nice and gives this deck a whole lot needed consistency. Speaking of, another thing that uses Counterblast is a 15k booster and gives you a +1 attack with Foxel, because if you're boosting Levidras, any of them, if you have, your opponent has an Infinity Eyes marker specifically, that's how you get the 2k, you Counterblast 1 of your back row units gets +10 and can attack from back row. This thing's really cool and it enables so much just fun that it's worth it. This will most likely always be a 3 or 4 of in your deck. Now, this is one of the most broken cards. We got set 1. Why? When it's placed on rear, once again, if it's in a column, so if ever you've revived it, you can activate this by paying 3 energy. Look at top 2. Choose a card from among them, put it on, take it to hand. Put it on the top or the bottom for the other one. And then it gets 5k. If you notice my sarcastic remark, this is Saragon. This is Saragoon on a grade 2 body. But guess what? It does more. Because if you have Grade 3 Levidras, which you should. 3 or more markers. It gets another plus 5k and can attack from back row regardless if it's on an Infinity Eyes marker or chosen by the previous card of Foxel. So even if you just leave this thing alone in the back row, 15k, that's still big enough to hit your opponent. If you used its on-place effect, that's swinging for 20. If it's on a marker, 30. He is basically who you're always calling, and even if you go first, you can activate 2 of his effect if you haven't spent that 3 energy you got from, riding up and paying for your grade 2 in the ride line. You can basically always activate one of these once per turn if you revive it, or play it from hand. However, King came in a second wave of support. We can just basically ignore him. I didn't even know he was a card until I decided to make this video. Don't play him ever, even as a budget option. You pay a cost of removing a marker or CB1, things you both want, only for a draw a card, and say it with me, everyone, plus 5k. Plus 5k. Yeah, so not worth it. But here's one of 2 broken cards in Levidras that we got in set 2 that can be abused. It's Squirrel. At the end of the turn, it boosted Soul Blast 1. Move it to an open rear guard in the back row. If you do, stand it and it gets 5k. Well, just alone, boosting. 8k booster. Pretty cool. If it's on an Infinity Eyes marker, 18k booster. Still pretty good, really helping hit consistent numbers. But what if, hear me out, you swing with Levidras first? Then Squirrel gets Foxel's 10k and can attack from back row. Well, this means this is now a 28k booster on a marker, or still just an 18k booster. Huh. Think about that. That's really big, but then you're allowed to move it to a rear guard again, stand it, and it gets 5k, meaning this can still be a 33k attacker. Wow. But how do you clear back the back row, you ask? Well, we got Charmet. Why? This thing is so consistent. Even on the reveal when I made a deck list, this thing is cracked. If you have 3 or more Infinity Eyes, you don't have the same unit as her, which you really shouldn't because you're playing her from drop. Soul Blast. Call her. Hey, guess what? If it attacks, retire another rear guard. Get power from that, and then at the end of the battle, you can choose to retire her to draw a card. So not only are you drawing more cards, you get her basically for free. Think about that. Just alone from her effect, she's 23. Infinity Eyes marker, 33. For a Soul Blast 1, draw a card. Huh. Okay. Cool. She's a must-have in the deck. But you just can't play a deck with all of Levidras support because, like I said, the Order and the Grade 3, forget about it. So what are some generic support? Well, obviously, this nation split is ridiculous. It doesn't do as much as your Grade 2 Energy Blaster, so you still just on-place from hand. You just look at the top card. If you don't like it, discard it. If you do, put it on the top. Hey, Counter Blast 1. Get back anything and activate its effect. So that means Anto-tag it. Engaster, your bug that Energy Blast is, do that. If you put a card on the top, call him Energy Blast 3, add it to your hand anyway. You basically just drew a card for Counter Blast 1. And guess what? You now know the top deck or your bottom deck. Hey, call Huli, Counter Blast another one. Still call Antogaster. Now you have 3 units for 1 unit. Counter Blast 2, you've looked at basically the top 3 cards of your deck and added 1 to your hand. Hey, but also if you want early game aggression, if you discarded Charmette, you can call it turn 2 because her effect, choose a grade 2 or greater from your drop and call it a rear. This isn't restricted by your Vanguard. Huh. Pretty cool. Obviously, we also have just good generic Stoicheia order from way back when. Mythiarch Habitat, look at top 7. Call a unit. What else do you need to know? Because if you've been paying attention, it's just on place if you have Infinity Eyes marker. Meaning, you can just still scry off the top. The only thing you can't do, really, if you play Saphira, is you can't activate her effect because it's from hand. I will bloody murder you. I need say not more. English doesn't have this, but JP does. This is Stoicheia's version of T-Fault. So once again, if it's placed by a unit's card ability, if you played a normal order this turn, Soul Blast 1, look at top 5, call a unit to rear. If not, if it's an order, add it to hand. Hey, but guess what? If you revive this thing from drop, which as you've seen, it's really good at doing, you can Energy Blast 2, which is a little controversial considering Antogaster. You stun an opponent's rear guard, so it can't intercept nor stand, and then you also get 5k power if your opponent's a grade 3 or greater. That's pretty good. Honestly, I think this could be played in Levidras. Maybe as a 4 of, replacing some of the more expensive options like Saphira, or maybe even Huli, but who's to say? I would have to do some more playtesting on that. You can also steal one of these two things from Magnolia. Gibreg is a guard restrict. It's using Soul Blast, which I'm not too happy about because you already have, Sharamit, who Soul Blast to revive itself. You have Squirrel, who moves and basically becomes another attacker. So not the most ideal, especially because we're in a meta where most people just blow up their own board, meaning it's very unlikely they'll leave a grade 1. Very rarely a grade 0 for this thing to actually have an effective guard restrict. Gwenosia is a personal favorite of mine, the Care Bear. It can attack from back row, so it's going to get Foxel's support, meaning it's swinging for 20, CB1, give 20k to another one. If you are on a Infinity Eyes marker, it's 30k, so CB1, move that power elsewhere. But because you can check the top cards of your deck consistently, if you see the overtrigger and you have Bear, that's a dead giveaway. Give 100 million to Bear, CB1, give 100 million to other unit. GG no re. But what is your regalia of choice? Honestly, because you're drawing a lot, especially during your opponent's turn, because you can pop a lot of Infinity Eyes. You want Blitz orders to get immediate, use out of them. So Twincast is the go-to option because from hand it's 10k. You can remove it from fight to basically be another 15k shield. Honestly, I think Transfer is better, if only for the fact it uses Soul, which is why it's a little bit more iffy, considering the same reason why I'm like, hey, maybe don't run another thing that, Soul Blast like Greg over there. So I've looked over so many lists. Thank you, VG Paradox, by the way, and Twitter. This is basically your most generic you can possibly get king list. Saphira is in here because she's very invaluable. There's not really a lot of things you can replace her with. If you do, I believe Spurring Maiden Aline with the countercharger is just a free loop you can continuously do. Because Spurring Maiden will call the countercharger, give it plus 5k. That will swing for 23 on a marker, go into Soul. You can then just retire Aline with Shamat, clearing things up a bit. The only downside is, once again, it's on place from hand, and you don't get to check the top card, nor do you get an order back. But, no draws, you already do that way too much, you will deck yourself out. 3 fronts, but you just want that critical pressure. I don't have to question heals, overtrigger of choice. Stoicheia's is great. Bless Favor is just literally every single trigger wrapped into one. If you're really paranoid, you could possibly run Purple, I guess, to heal and call another unit, but Normally you want to swing with Levidras first in most situations, so you're not really getting the full value out of that. But if you do want to customize this list a bit further, let me introduce you to basically limited options, because you want to run King as your ride line target. You cannot touch base Levidras at 4 copies, because you need to see them consistently. And I guess if you want to be weird, you can Persona ride with it, but why would you? As I said, Anagaster, you want as a 4 of. They're just your core. That's the only things you're not allowed to touch. Shamat's really broken. However, if we go to my next slide, this is what you can really touch. Sharamet will never be less than 3 copies, meaning you can take 1 away to have 1 niche option. Squirrel, as you know, would be a 2 of, so you can put a 3rd if you want. Sapphire is not really budget option, so you really have a flex space of 4. Going back to the deck list if you just want to see it. The other one I didn't include is Foxel. You could make that like a 3 of as well. So, realistically, you could also cut down Huli. So that's 1 from Shamet, 1 from Huli. We're taking out a Foxel, so that's 3 cards you can touch. 7 if you get rid of, Saphira. I've shown you some generic options you can choose from, but basically, very much pay attention to these 2 of Shamat. Will never be less than 3. Squirrel will never be more than 3. As long as you keep to that, you'll have a pretty good deck. Now, what you came here for is a little bit more in-depth about the deck. Do you want to go first or second? You want to go first. You get so much pressure just getting 5 attacks at pretty big numbers. And it avoids most early game aggression. I would say you always want at least 2 CB going into your grade 3 turn. However, your opponent makes you go second, which I honestly think most decks want to go second, so you're going to go first anyway. You kind of get a lot of advantage because you can just go right for the Divine skill, get 10k and a crit, and flood the field with 5 Infinity Eyes marker, with only 1 of them having to be on your opponent's side of the field because of the Divine skill. Some just general tips in Mulligan. I like to throw back all my triggers and PGs, mainly because you don't need them for a late game. You can absorb a lot of damage in the beginning because you just start drawing a lot of cards, meaning you'll draw into shield value, your drive checks, shield value. You're checking the top deck of the card most of the time, so you can really just dig for heals if you need to, bottom deck them if you don't want to check them. If you're super nervous, you can try to hard mulligan for a base Levidras just to throw into Soul for that turn 3, turn 4 turn. I would definitely try to find a Charmet early to discard just to set up your early plays or early aggression if you really wanted to Safina, Counterblast 1, call her back. I don't recommend you do that, but it's really just there for when you have your Infinity Eyes, just for the free callback. 9 out of 10, your grade 2 ride line, Mantis Scythe, will just fix anything you're missing in your hand because the grade 1 keeps your hand advantage, and Mantis Scythe will actually draw you another card, but of your choosing from top 5. And the most helpful tip, realize that if you decide to play this deck and, this King meta, realize this is a really broken deck, and if you do a lot of practice with it, your chances of losing really decrease. Over here is just a very generic starting board that you can normally very much consistently hit always. Where you ride into King, you'll have Foxel. I would just tuck a base Imperial, base Levidras into Soul to give your opponent 1 marker. I like to hit my top left and bottom right always. But even if you don't, you can just throw something to Soul to give yourself 2. Counterblast if you need to. I don't recommend. From there, you can Soul Blast, call Shamet. You can play Gangsta to look at other options, draw. play Squirrel, or you could Hooli revive, Gangster or Squirrel. Keep this board up. I don't have animations, but basically you'll swing with Empireo. You can give Squirrel the power from that counterblast from Foxel. You can then attack with Gangsta, because he can attack from back row. Or you can begin with that, then attack with Empireo if you're worried about your opponent getting defensive. You'll swing with Shalamet to get rid of Gangsta, which leaves you to boost Hooli with a very big 28k booster, meaning she's a 48k attack. You will Soul Blast another, move Squirrel off to another back row with where it is now to stand, swing 33. Pretty good. You get really used to moving him around if you need it. I always find 2 is the best in deck because you don't need more for soul consumption. Basically, this is your resource loop. On full, Antigaster will stack the top of your deck, be an extra attack. You will have Charmant to retire a Gangsta, draw, set up another row attack if you need to. And then you just have Saphira and Hooli to revive Anagaster because Charmant calls herself. Some things you just got to look out for is you got to really be good at CB and soul management, because both Charmant and Squirrel both use soul. You get 3 from the ride line, and you get +1 anytime you persona ride because you can just get out, your king. You start to lose power because don't forget you get 5k for every base levy address, so you can soul blast those out, but then you lose that power, so I don't recommend doing that. Don't forget that Hooli and Saphira both use a CB, but so does enabling more multi-attack with Foxel is tied to CB. While you do have a Sisir, if you remember in the deck log that I showed, it's not playing it. You can as like a Techie 1, 2 of, but it's not always in build, so if it's not, you've really got to CB manage. Don't forget, Levidras Empireo can help you with these both resources, but if you're either filling the soul with its ability, you're most likely always throwing in base levy address, which is something you cannot touch. But worst case worse, you can use the CB, but then that's touching the limited resource of reviving and multi-attacking. Some issues this deck runs into is definitely yourself. This is a knowledge-based matchup. You will either deck yourself out, or in the mirror, you got to know how to play around it, because there's going to be a lot of adding and a lot of subtracting, and a lot of Infinity Eyes markers going around. So please have some at least unique shield or something so generic you don't mind losing them. And now just some things to watch out for. I put Starina more as it exists in the world. Remember it, because it can just blow up all markers you have, so it just kind of sets your tempo back, and then it retires your field, which isn't the worst thing in the world. You've revived so much. Bat, Aldaglima. This is a really toxic deck that exists in the world. This will blow you out of the water if you allow it to. And, of course, I said it's a king meta. Vita and, Malworm are in this game, too. So that's something to always be looking out for. I guess I did lie. I can just turn back to my camera now. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of how to play, Imperial Levy Address. While you're listening to me out of all people, I don't know. I try to put things on a very basis level for understanding, and if you comment, I will try to answer as best as I can about tips, tricks, or just anything. If you just want to say hi, comment hi. I'll say hi. Yeah, I know it takes a lot to get past my ramblings, especially because it's New Year's Eve, at least when I'm uploading this. So you got time to watch, actually. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and hopefully you enjoy playing Levy Address King and being the best deck in the format. curb stomping literally everyone else.